Hi, and welcome to Our Stories Hold the Power, How to Tap In and Grow Your Mission. I'm Angie Aker, former editor-in-chief of MoveOn.org, one of the founding minds of the viral media startup Upworthy, a headline-getting progressive activist, and now the digital content manager of Food and Water Watch, where I can use all I've learned in the fight to preserve our climate and precious natural resources. Next slide. Here's what you'll learn in today's session: why we need storytelling skills to educate and organize people, and why this skill is different from reporting. 2, tips and tricks for zeroing in on the story you want to tell. And 3, how to find a hook, write headlines that get people to click, and infuse a personal connection into your story. Next slide. Why storytelling? What is it? Why we need storytelling skills in organizing work is a three-prong answer. So for context, look at your newsfeed. We can't win a competition for attention if we don't even know that we're involved in one. And so we must acknowledge that. Who are we competing with? Everybody. Squatty Potty and other viral marketing, other progressive organizations, bad news about climate and COVID, local updates, Aunt Susie's cat photos. Those are all things that are confronting people as they scroll through their newsfeed, and we've got to get their attention in the middle of all that. Pew Research says that 6 million more Americans get news from social media than from traditional news outlets. And our piece of that market share is in competition with every person, organization, and public figure that everyone in our audience has ever followed. So we're really competing with everybody, but that's a challenge that we're ready to step up to. Another reason why we need storytelling skills in our organizing work is because we need to bring empathy to it. When we don't storytell, we often report facts in a massive and difficult to read, difficult to follow manner. When we do this, only the most invested audience members will stick with us and stick with the reading and complete the action that we hope they will. Storytelling is how we get out of our own way and let people support us. And the third reason why is because of efficacy. Facts are important, but people make decisions based on emotions. Even the most logical people make instinctive choices about whether to complete online actions based on their emotions, even if the facts are part of what drove those emotions. We can optimize our content to be aligned with our audience's emotional inclinations to support us and result in more actions taken by the people who already want to. Next slide. So what is the difference between reporting and storytelling? Think about a time someone told you a story in a way that had you hanging on every word. They controlled the narrative and how much they told you and when. They had your attention and you had to know how it ended, right? Often, the way organizations write public-facing content is a straightforward telling of facts, figures, happenings, dates, and data. That's reporting. But to storytell, you must lead the reader through an unfolding of information. To lead the reader through an unfolding of information, you want to start with a hook that reels them in and entices them to learn the rest. This is an example of one time that we did that. We took a local, wonky kind of issue and turned it into storytelling. In Tampa Bay, Florida, there was a city council proposition about 100% renewable energy. But while our team was there fighting that, they learned that a company, a fossil fuel company, was pushing kind of a secret proposal behind the scenes for liquefied natural gas. It was a wonky kind of story to tell, but we were able to find a way to create a hook that made this less of a dry reporting facts and figures, and we were able to turn it into an actual narrative. This could have easily ended up being reporting that was only read by a handful of very invested individuals. And instead, we were able to turn it into an interesting story that has state and maybe even national appeal because we developed the hook. Next slide. So it started by changing our opening paragraph and being intentional about how we infused dates, numbers, definitions, and figures later on in the piece. We took all of that out of the opening and instead used a storytelling approach. Strom Inc. probably hoped we would never find out what they were trying to get approved, but while working on passing a local measure in front of the Tampa City Council to end fossil fuel use and transition to 100% renewables, imagine our surprise when we learned about a proposed Tampa fracked gas project that had been quietly moving forward for years. By that simple action, by changing that intro to a more storytelling approach, we were able to get the story started off on a more personal, on a more understandable level, on something that wasn't laden with heavy facts and figures, and something that really invited the reader to come along with us on the journey of how we experienced this. Next slide. So how do you do that? How do you storytell? Next slide. You want to find your hook. Admit it, we tune in when there's drama, right? It's a guilty pleasure when it comes to content consumption. Luckily for us, activism is full of drama. And if we tell it right, people who may be on the cusp of becoming activists or supporting activists can be enthralled to hear about what's going on behind the scenes. So where is the drama in this particular event that you want the world to be interested in? In the piece we just talked about, the drama was the fact that there was this sneaky proposal happening behind the scenes that we weren't supposed to know about. That's dramatic. That's something that we could turn into a story. So drama is what will reel them in, and drama is what will keep them reading. And it's a great tactic as long as you avoid being heavy-handed with it, because ultimately our credibility is the most important thing. Here are some tips and tricks for writing a story. Identify your audience. Is it a local, more invested, more insidery niche audience? Or is it a national, general public audience where you would want to go a little bit broader with the information? Knowing that and really identifying that primary audience you want to reach is going to help shape how you frame everything to come. Next, you want to write some headlines first. You can always edit them or go with a new one when the writing is done, but what most people do is they save their headlines for last. By writing them first, you can actually organize your own sense of the premise that you're writing to, instead of the field being wide open. And this helps you to avoid reporting or vomiting everything you know about an issue onto the page and then hoping you can shape it into something cohesive and with a point later. Then you want to identify 2 to 3 main takeaways from the piece, and you want to be really disciplined to keep your writing tightly germane to those. If you stuff your story with everything there is to know or tell about an issue or campaign, it's less likely the reader will retain anything over time. If you have the discipline to zero in on what's important and really emphasize those points, they might still hang on to some of that information. Have a call to action. Everything you publish should have a call to action, whether it's a petition, a donation button, or simply asking people to share it on social media. Your story and the social resources you're using to create it and share it should result in furthering your mission, but it can't do that without actually making the ask and putting in the call to action. Think about your personal connection. Think about how this issue affects you or is important to you. How can you infuse even a small piece of context or tone to show you aren't just a writer, but part of the impacted community too? This helps the reader feel a sense of solidarity with you. You've all received a brief for this exercise with a campaign issue to write about. The link is in the chat too if you need access to it again. For the purposes of this exercise, you don't need to know any more than the pertinent info that's in the brief, though a link to a news piece is in there in case. Hi, everybody. Now it's time to have some fun with these principles and try your hand at them. Don't worry if it feels challenging your first run through. It gets easier the more you get practice with developing stories for the web. Next slide, please. So You've all received a brief for this exercise with a campaign issue to write about. The link is in the chat too if you need access to it again, and we're about to go over it here together too. For the purposes of this exercise, you don't need to know any more than the pertinent info that's listed in the brief, though there is a link there to a news piece on the subject in case you want to speed read it for more context or if you want to learn more about it later. And so I'll go through that issue brief with you now. Our stories hold the power. So this is our campaign issue. Fracking companies may be using dangerous PFAS chemicals to break up shale. So PFAS chemicals are those forever chemicals that can never be eradicated from our water and are known carcinogens. They're byproducts that end up in our waterways and our soil from manufacturing processes for Teflon and carpeting and things of that nature. And so fracking companies might be using those same chemicals in their process, which is obviously terrible. Our objectives with this campaign are to get the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection to demand fracking companies to divulge whether forever chemicals are present in their trade secret lists, and if so, which ones. And then also, we want to get water testing expanded. So there is a link underneath. You guys can feel free to look at that, but I'm going to go through some of the highlights from that, which will be pertinent for the exercise. So PFAS water testing around Pennsylvania needs to be expanded to include sources near fracking sites. They're currently testing in other places, but they really want to see if there are elevated levels coming out of the process of fracking. The Philadelphia Inquirer has used public information to determine that some PFAS are being used in fracking, but in order to really know the full scope of it, the DEP needs to investigate. PFAS and fracking have both been associated with cancer to varying degrees, including a cluster of rare cancers in children who live near fracking sites in Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania's constitutional right to pure water is being threatened by a lack of action from DEP. So there are no right or wrong answers for this exercise. This is up to your judgment, and you largely get to make it up based on hypotheticals that you can imagine might be possible in your campaign. You can come at this as if you are the director of a national org, or whether you're working in an org directly in Pennsylvania or a local org in Pittsburgh. You can really come at this from however you want to come at it. You'll have up to 10 minutes to complete this entire exercise unless everyone is done sooner. So the things that you're going to look at is who is your audience? If you're writing a story around this campaign, do you want to go with a national audience or a state audience or a more localized audience? And then after that, do you want those audience members, do you think this is going to be more geared towards activists who are very invested in these issues, or do you want a more general public audience to take an interest in this as well? Then looking at the highlights, what's one hook that you immediately see that you think would be compelling to readers? So think about, again, where is the drama? Then write 1 to 2 headlines that pull a reader in with the hook that you've identified. And finally, think about what your personal connection to this issue is and how you might be able to use it to help the reader relate to you and be invested in your perspective. So we have up to 10 minutes to complete this exercise unless you're done sooner, and I'll be available in the chat to keep us all moving. All right, so I'm not seeing any answers yet in the chat, so we're going to start talking about some of the challenges you might be experiencing in this exercise as you're looking at the highlights and thinking about these. Next slide. So it can be difficult to decide who our primary audience is. A lot of times we want everybody. We want activists to care about it. We want the general public to care about it. But we really have to think about, who we want to target with our strategy for how we're writing the piece. So for instance, this piece is about fracking in Pennsylvania. And I could, if I have an organization that is based mainly in Pennsylvania, maybe I want to target directly to Pennsylvanians and not to a national general public audience because of the fact that we've built up a huge audience that is very dense with people who live in Pennsylvania, the very people you want taking action on this. So that might be a great approach to take if that's your particular situation. Or you may have an org that has national presence, members all over the country, and you want to be able to amass the power of a wide general audience looking at this and demanding answers as well. And so maybe you decide that you want to take a broader approach rather than speaking to the audience as if they're all in Pennsylvania. So it really just depends on some variables about what type of audience you have amassed and what your organization is that you're working for. You may have also noticed looking at the highlights that there are multiple potential hooks that you could pull from. So for instance, one headline that I might use is fracking, contaminants, and cancer. Pennsylvanians need to know if they're connected. So really taking the fact that fracking and PFAS have been associated with cancer, that's something that is very, very concerning to people and makes them really take notice and say, yes, we do need answers for that. So there are other hooks that you can find in those highlights as well. You can talk about the fact that this is only the tip of the iceberg. The Philadelphia Inquirer has found a few. What more are lurking in that water being used to break up the shale and really make it kind of like a mystery that needs to be solved. So there are different approaches that you can take. And then one other thing that you might realize is that maybe there are multiple objectives from your team as you think about what your call to action is and what you're trying to get people to do. Maybe sometimes, you're not going to be able to cover all those things in one piece. Perhaps the piece that you're writing, your fundraising department really wants to have the call to action at the end be a donation action, and you're gearing your write-up to be a little bit broader, a little more accessible to the general public. Or maybe at the same time, you have an organizing department who really wants the piece that you're writing to get signups for an action that they're planning. And so sometimes you might decide that writing more than one piece is appropriate and that you're going to take a different approach and a different angle with each of them. So this isn't really about there being a right or wrong answer, but more about being able to look at it through these lenses so that you can build a strategy about how to write your story. So you can drop any questions or comments into the session chat, and I will be around afterwards to keep answering some of those. And I want to thank you. Next slide, please. I want to thank you for attending and participating. And I hope you learned some useful tools today that can help you recruit and educate more folks to the movement. And thank you for being such an important part of the mission at Food and Water Watch to protect our planet. Enjoy the rest of the virtual benefit sessions. Have a great day and fight like you live here.